Sarah Miller's wedding day started like a dream at the Golden Plaza Hotel. The spring air felt perfect, and the hotel's grand ballroom sparkled with white and gold decorations. The bride had spent months planning every detail, from the crystal centerpieces to the carefully chosen playlist. As a successful civil rights attorney, Sarah had invited a diverse group of guests, including family, colleagues, and community members who had become like family through her work. Officer James Sullivan stood at his post outside the reception hall, his face tight with tension. He had been assigned to provide security for the high-profile wedding, as many important community leaders were attending. Sullivan had been on the force for 15 years, and his record showed several complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from his file. As he watched guests arrive, his discomfort grew more visible with each passing minute. Thomas Johnson, Sarah's favorite cousin, pulled up in his Tesla. He had rushed to make it to the wedding after finishing his emergency room shift at Central Hospital. Despite the hurry, he looked sharp in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo. Thomas had always been the family's pride, a brilliant doctor who had graduated top of his class from medical school. He grabbed his gift from the passenger seat, a special painting he had commissioned for Sarah and her new husband. As Thomas walked toward the entrance, he noticed Sullivan's stare following him. He had experienced these looks before and had learned to keep his head high. In his pocket, he carried both his wedding invitation and his hospital ID, knowing from experience that he might need them. The hotel's security cameras silently recorded as Thomas approached the entrance. Other guests were streaming in without being stopped, but Sullivan stepped directly into Thomas's path. "Where do you think you're going?" Sullivan demanded, his hand resting on his belt. "I'm here for the Miller-Johnson wedding. I'm the bride's cousin," Thomas replied calmly, reaching for his invitation. His years of handling emergency room crises helped him maintain his composure. Sarah, still in the bridal suite making final preparations, had no idea what was unfolding downstairs. She was speaking with her mother about her work plans after the honeymoon. She had several important cases waiting, including a police reform initiative she had been passionate about. Meanwhile, in the lobby, the situation was quickly deteriorating. Despite Thomas showing his invitation and medical ID, Sullivan became more aggressive. Other guests began to notice the confrontation, and several took out their phones to record what was happening. Sullivan's face grew red with anger as he noticed the cameras. "These could be fake," Sullivan snapped, snatching the invitation from Thomas's hand. "We've had problems with party crashers." This was a lie. There had been no such issues, and the hotel staff knew Thomas well from multiple planning meetings for the wedding. Michael Johnson, Sarah's soon-to-be husband, was greeting guests in the ballroom when his phone buzzed with urgent messages. The hotel manager was trying to reach him about a disturbance in the lobby. In the bridal suite, Sarah's mother's phone started ringing too. Everything changed in a split second. Sullivan, seemingly enraged by Thomas's calm demeanor and the watching crowd, suddenly grabbed him. The expensive gift crashed to the ground, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the lobby. Before anyone could intervene, Sullivan had thrown Thomas against the wall, twisting his arm behind his back. Sarah, hearing the commotion, stepped out of the elevator in her stunning white dress, ready to make her entrance. Instead of seeing smiling guests, she found her beloved cousin being assaulted by a police officer. Her legal training kicked in immediately as she rushed forward, her wedding dress flowing behind her. The scene felt frozen in time. Thomas pressed against the wall, Sullivan red-faced and aggressive, guests recording with shocked expressions, and Sarah, a vision in white, running toward the chaos. The security cameras captured everything, their red lights blinking steadily as they recorded what would soon become viral footage. In that moment, Sarah knew her wedding day had transformed into something else entirely. This was no longer just about celebrating love. It had become about fighting the very injustice she had dedicated her career to opposing. As she reached the lobby, her voice rang out clear and strong, ready to defend her family and everything she believed in. The next few minutes at the Golden Plaza Hotel turned into chaos that no one would ever forget. Sarah's voice cut through the tension as she shouted, "Let him go." Her white wedding dress seemed to glow under the lobby lights as she rushed toward Officer Sullivan and her cousin Thomas. Sullivan, startled by Sarah's appearance, tightened his grip on Thomas. "Stay back, ma'am. This is police business," he growled, pressing Thomas harder against the wall. Thomas winced in pain but remained silent, his medical training helping him stay calm even as his arm was twisted behind his back. Hotel guests pulled out their phones, recording everything. The hotel manager, Mr. Chen, frantically called for backup security while trying to explain that Thomas was indeed a wedding guest. "Officer, please, there's been a mistake. Dr. Johnson is the bride's cousin." Michael, Sarah's groom, pushed through the growing crowd. He was still wearing his boutonniere, the small white flower now slightly crushed from his rush to reach the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, moving to stand beside Sarah. Sullivan's face grew redder as he realized he was surrounded by witnesses. Sweat began to show through his uniform. He was resisting, Sullivan lied, even though the security cameras and dozens of phones were capturing the truth. Thomas had never resisted, he had only tried to show his invitation and ID. Sarah, using her courtroom voice, spoke clearly and firmly. "I am Sarah Miller Johnson, a civil rights attorney, and this is my wedding day. The man you're assaulting is Dr. Thomas Johnson, my cousin and a respected emergency room physician. Release him immediately." The situation took an even darker turn when Sullivan reached for his handcuffs. That's when Sarah's father, Judge William Miller, emerged from the crowd. His presence usually commanded respect, but Sullivan seemed beyond reason. "Officer Sullivan," Judge Miller's voice boomed through the lobby, "I'm ordering you to release my nephew. Your actions are being recorded from multiple angles, and you're making a grave mistake." Several wedding guests who worked in law enforcement stepped forward, their faces showing disappointment and anger at their colleagues' behavior. One of them, Detective Maria Rodriguez, approached carefully. "James, let him go. You're wrong here, and you know it." But Sullivan had gone too far to back down. He tried to put handcuffs on Thomas, causing Sarah to spring into action. She pulled out her phone and dialed the police chief's direct number, a contact she had from her legal work. "Chief Martinez, this is Sarah Miller Johnson. One of your officers is assaulting my cousin at my wedding at the Golden Plaza Hotel. Yes, we have multiple recordings. The officer's name is James Sullivan." The hotel's security team finally arrived, followed closely by two other police officers who had been patrolling nearby. They had received an urgent call from their chief about the situation. Sullivan, seeing his backup arrive, expected support. Instead, Officer Janet Chen, one of the responding officers, immediately took control. "Sullivan, stand down. Release him now." The moment Thomas was free, medical professionals among the wedding guests rushed to check on him. His wrist was sprained, and his expensive tuxedo was torn at the shoulder. But Thomas's first words weren't about his injuries. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about your wedding day." Sarah hugged her cousin carefully, trying not to cry and ruin her makeup. "This isn't your fault, Thomas. This is exactly why we fight for change." Officer Chen and her partner took Sullivan aside. The chief had ordered them to remove Sullivan from the scene immediately. As they led him away, Sullivan's face showed no remorse, only anger at being caught and stopped. Hotel staff quickly brought water and offered a quiet room for Thomas and the family. Sarah's wedding planner, Jenny, tried to salvage the situation, suggesting they move forward with the ceremony. But Sarah had already made up her mind about what needed to happen next. Standing in the middle of the hotel lobby, her white dress now slightly wrinkled from the chaos, Sarah looked at her fiancé Michael. He nodded, understanding without words. Their wedding day had become something bigger than just their celebration. "Everyone," Sarah announced to the gathered crowd, "what just happened is exactly why our fight for justice never ends. Today, we'll celebrate love and justice, and tomorrow, we'll make sure Officer Sullivan never does this to anyone else again." The Golden Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, decorated for a perfect wedding celebration, now felt more like a war room. Sarah Miller Johnson sat at what should have been her sweetheart table, still in her wedding dress, but instead of enjoying her first dance, she was gathering evidence. "Send all your videos to this email address," she instructed the guests who had recorded the incident. Her laptop was open, creating folders for each piece of evidence. Her new husband Michael sat beside her, his bow tie now loose around his neck, making calls to their network of legal contacts. Thomas Johnson sat nearby with paramedics checking his injuries. His doctor colleagues from the hospital had arrived after hearing what happened, bringing a proper medical kit. "The wrist is sprained," said Dr. Patricia Wan, gently wrapping Thomas's arm. "And there's bruising on his shoulder and back." The hotel manager, Mr. Chen, approached with a stack of papers. Mrs. Johnson, we've printed all the security camera footage from every angle. Our team is backing everything up right now. His hands shook slightly as he handed over the papers. We're so sorry this happened at your wedding. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her face showing both determination and gratitude. Mr. Chen, you and your staff have been amazing. This evidence will help make sure Officer Sullivan faces consequences for his actions. In another corner of the ballroom, Sarah's father, Judge Miller, spoke quietly with Police Chief Martinez, who had arrived personally after hearing about the incident. Bill, I want you to know we're taking this seriously, the chief said, looking troubled. Sullivan's been suspended without pay, effective immediately. The wedding guests, still dressed in their finest clothes, had transformed from celebration mode to support mode. Lawyers offered their services, journalists made calls to their editors, and community activists began organizing. The beautiful wedding cake sat untouched, its white frosting matching Sarah's dress. Thomas tried to apologize again, but Sarah cut him off. Stop it, Thomas. You did nothing wrong. In fact, she paused, looking at her cousin with tears in her eyes. You showed incredible strength today. The way you stayed calm, you probably prevented things from getting even worse. Michael's sister, a social media expert, worked with her team to document everything online. Within hours, the incident was trending. The videos are going viral, she reported. People are demanding action. They're calling it the wedding day assault. The wedding photographer approached Sarah with her camera. I got everything, she said quietly. From the moment Officer Sullivan first stopped Thomas, I always keep my camera running between formal shots. The timestamps will match the security footage. As evening fell, the beautiful sunset visible through the ballroom's large windows, the scene inside remained intense. The romantic dinner had been replaced by delivery pizzas and laptops. Wedding guests in formal wear huddled in groups, making calls and drafting statements. Sarah's mother brought her a plate of food. Sweetheart, you need to eat something, she insisted, straightening Sarah's veil which had gone crooked hours ago. We can postpone the actual wedding celebration. Right now, you need your strength. Thomas, finally finished with the medical examination, walked over to Sarah. His tuxedo jacket was off, his white shirt showing the torn shoulder. Sarah, the hospital board is meeting tomorrow morning. They're ready to support whatever legal action you take, and they want to review all cases where Sullivan was involved with our ER. The DJ, unsure what to do, played soft background music as people worked. The dance floor, meant for celebration, had become a temporary command center where civil rights leaders gathered to plan their response. Sarah stood up, gathering everyone's attention. Her wedding dress caught the light, making her look almost otherworldly. Everyone, listen please, she called out. The room fell silent. Today was supposed to be about love. Instead, it became about justice. But maybe that's exactly what it needed to be. Thomas, what happened to you today? It's happened to too many others. But this time, we have everything on video. We have witnesses, we have evidence, and we have an army of people ready to fight for justice. Michael stood beside her, taking her hand. Tomorrow, Sarah continued, we start working to make sure Officer Sullivan never wears a badge again. But tonight, I want to thank all of you for standing with us, for being here, for documenting everything. This isn't the wedding we planned, but maybe it's the wedding that needed to happen. The morning after the wedding, Sarah's law office became the center of a growing investigation. Still wearing yesterday's makeup and running on coffee, she sat at her desk reviewing Officer Sullivan's personnel file that a whistleblower had sent overnight. Look at this, she called to Michael, who had brought fresh coffee and bagels. 5 complaints of racial profiling in the last 2 years alone. All of them mysteriously disappeared. She spread the papers across her desk, her diamond ring catching the morning light as she pointed to different documents. Thomas arrived at the office, his arm in a proper medical sling now. The hospital board just finished their emergency meeting, he announced. They found 12 incidents where Sullivan had harassed families in the emergency room. All families of color. All complaints were ignored. The office phones kept ringing nonstop. Linda, Sarah's assistant, rushed in with more news. The police union is trying to protect Sullivan, but 3 officers just came forward. They say they've been keeping their own records of his behavior because internal affairs wouldn't listen. Sarah's computer pinged with a new email. It was from Officer Janet Chen, who had helped stop Sullivan at the wedding. She's willing to testify. Sarah read aloud, her voice growing excited. She says she has a personal log of every racist comment Sullivan made during their shared shifts. Meanwhile, across town at the police station, internal affairs investigators were facing their own crisis. Captain Rodriguez sat in his office, looking at the mounting evidence against not just Sullivan, but the entire complaint system. "Sir," a young investigator said, entering his office with another stack of files, "we found more hidden complaints in the archived records." Someone had been marking racial incident reports as minor infractions and burying them. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Outside Sarah's office building, reporters gathered, hoping for updates. The image of a bride in her wedding dress standing up to a racist cop had captured national attention. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had witnessed everything at the wedding, arrived at Sarah's office with more files. "These are from our precinct's hidden archives," she explained. "Some of us, we've been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. Your wedding, it finally exposed everything." Sarah's father, Judge Miller, called a meeting with the district attorney. "The Judicial Oversight Committee is opening a full investigation," he told Sarah over the phone. "We're looking at every case where Sullivan testified, every arrest he made, every report he filed." Thomas spent the afternoon giving interviews to major news networks, his doctor's coat and sling making a powerful image. "This isn't just about what happened to me," he told reporters. "This is about every person who faced discrimination and wasn't believed." By evening, social media had exploded with more victims coming forward. Sarah's email inbox filled with stories from people who had encountered Sullivan over his 15 years on the force. Each story showed a clear pattern of racism and abuse of power. The police chief called an emergency press conference. "We are conducting a thorough investigation," he announced, looking uncomfortable under the bright lights. "Officer Sullivan has been suspended, and we are reviewing all complaints against him, past and present." Back in her office, Sarah pinned photos and documents to a large board, connecting events with red string. Her wedding dress hung in the corner, a silent witness to where it all began. Michael worked nearby, organizing testimonies from wedding guests. "Sarah," he said softly, "Channel 7 wants to do a special report. They're calling it The Wedding That Changed Everything." She turned from her evidence board, exhausted but determined. "This goes beyond Sullivan now," she said. "We're looking at systematic cover-ups, years of ignored complaints, officials who looked the other way. My wedding didn't just expose one racist cop, it's exposing an entire broken system." Linda rushed in again, waving a paper. "Sarah, you need to see this. Someone leaked Sullivan's text messages to other officers. The things he said, it's all the evidence we need." Sarah took the paper, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "Every piece of evidence matters," she said, pinning the new document to her board. "Every voice matters. What happened at my wedding was terrible, but it's giving people the courage to finally speak up. And this time, everyone is listening." 1 week after the wedding incident, the city's largest church was packed for an emergency community meeting. Sarah stood at the podium, no longer in her wedding dress but wearing a sharp business suit, addressing hundreds of concerned citizens. "What happened at my wedding was not an isolated incident," she declared, her voice strong and clear. "Officer Sullivan's actions opened our eyes to a much bigger problem. But today, we're here to work on solutions." The crowd included people from all walks of life, doctors wearing scrubs who had rushed over after their shifts, teachers still carrying their classroom bags, office workers in business attire, and families with children. Many held signs reading "Justice for Dr. Johnson" and "No More Silent Victims." Thomas sat in the front row, his arm still in a sling. Next to him, a group of his emergency room patients had come to show support. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman whose grandson had previously been harassed by Sullivan, stood up with tears in her eyes. "For years, we were afraid to speak up," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice shaking. "But seeing what happened at your wedding, seeing how you fought back, it gave us courage. We're not afraid anymore." Local business owners stepped forward with support. Mr. Chen, the hotel manager where the wedding took place, announced that the Golden Plaza Hotel would provide free meeting spaces for community organizing. "What we witnessed that day changed us all," he said. "We must do our part." Sarah's law firm had transformed into a command center for change. Linda, her assistant, coordinated hundreds of volunteers who were gathering statements from Sullivan's victims. The office walls were covered with charts showing patterns of police misconduct across the city. Michael, who had postponed their honeymoon indefinitely, worked alongside community leaders to create a new civilian oversight committee. "We need regular people watching the Watchmen," he explained to a group of volunteers. "No more hidden complaints. No more buried evidence." Local news crews filmed as Sarah unveiled a new mobile app her tech team had developed. "This app lets people safely record and report police interactions," she demonstrated. "Every report is automatically backed up and sent to multiple secure locations. No more lost evidence." Outside the church, food trucks donated meals to the growing crowd. Children played while their parents shared stories and signed petitions. What had started as anger over one incident had grown into a movement for lasting change. Detective Rodriguez, who had helped stop Sullivan at the wedding, now led workshops teaching people their rights during police encounters. "Good police officers want bad ones exposed," she told the crowd. "We need your help to clean up our department." Thomas, despite his injuries, started a support group for medical professionals who had witnessed discrimination in healthcare settings. "The healing has to happen everywhere," he explained. "In our hospitals, in our schools, in our streets." Sarah's father, Judge Miller, worked with other judges to review cases where discrimination might have affected verdicts. "The justice system only works when it's truly just," he announced at the meeting. "We're going through every case, every report, every complaint." Community artists painted a mural on a downtown wall, a striking image of Sarah in her wedding dress standing up to injustice. Below it, people left flowers and notes sharing their own stories of survival and hope. Local churches and community centers opened their doors for training sessions. Lawyers taught people about their rights, tech experts showed them how to safely document incidents, and counselors provided support for those sharing traumatic experiences. As evening fell, Sarah stood with Michael on the church steps, watching people unite across all the usual dividing lines of race, age, and social status. "This is what a wedding gift really looks like," she said softly. "Not presents in boxes, but people coming together for change." Linda rushed up with more news. "Sarah, 3 other cities have called. They want to start similar programs. Your wedding video, it's inspiring people everywhere." A small girl approached Sarah with a handmade card. Inside, in crayon, she had written, "Thank you for being brave at your wedding. Now my mommy isn't scared anymore." Sarah held the card carefully, looking out at the crowd of people working together. "Sometimes," she told Michael, "love and justice are the same thing. Our wedding didn't go as planned, but look what it started. Look how many people are finally being heard." The community meeting continued into the night, with people sharing stories, making plans, and building the foundations for real change. What had begun as one bride's stand against injustice had become an entire city's movement toward hope. 2 weeks after the wedding incident, the city courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. Sarah Miller Johnson stood before Judge Patricia Henderson, not in her wedding dress this time, but in her sharpest legal suit. The courtroom was packed with community members, all waiting to hear the charges against Officer Sullivan. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear, "this isn't just about what happened at my wedding. We're presenting evidence of 15 years of documented racial abuse and discrimination by Officer Sullivan." She placed a thick binder on the evidence table. District Attorney Marcus Thompson sat beside Sarah, an unusual sight that showed how serious the case had become. "The state is pursuing criminal charges," he announced. "Assault, abuse of power, civil rights violations, and evidence tampering." Officer Sullivan sat at the defense table, still looking angry rather than sorry. His police union lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Sullivan just stared straight ahead with cold eyes. His shiny badge was gone, replaced by a small American flag pin on his suit lapel. Thomas Johnson sat in the front row, his medical coat making him easy to spot. His injured arm was healing, but the emotional scars were still fresh. Next to him sat 5 other doctors who had come forward with stories about Sullivan harassing their patients of color in the emergency room. "We have video evidence from multiple angles," Sarah continued, playing the wedding footage on the courtroom's large screen. "The guests' recordings, security cameras, and even the wedding photographer's shots showed the attack from every possible view. Sullivan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Detective Maria Rodriguez took the stand, her testimony powerful and clear. Officer Sullivan had a pattern, she explained. He targeted people of color, then buried their complaints. Some of us tried to report him, but the complaints kept disappearing. The courthouse hallway filled with more people as word spread about the hearing. Mr. Chen, the hotel manager, brought security footage from other incidents at the hotel. He did this before, Mr. Chen testified. We have videos of him harassing guests of color, but no one would listen to our complaints. Sarah's laptop pinged with a new message. 3 more officers had come forward, ready to testify about Sullivan's racist behavior. Linda, her assistant, quickly printed their statements and rushed them to the district attorney. Officer Janet Chen's testimony hit particularly hard. Sullivan used to brag about it, she revealed. He called it cleaning up the neighborhood. He knew how to make his reports sound legal, even when they weren't. She then shared her personal log of every racist comment Sullivan had made during their shared shifts. During a break, Michael brought Sarah a cup of coffee. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Their honeymoon tickets to Hawaii sat unused in Sarah's desk drawer, but neither of them regretted staying to fight this battle. "I'm good," Sarah replied, reviewing her notes. "Sullivan's lawyer looks worried. He knows we have too much evidence to ignore." She pointed to a new stack of files from Internal Affairs, showing how complaints against Sullivan had been systematically buried. Judge Henderson listened carefully to each piece of evidence. When Sullivan's lawyer tried to dismiss the wedding video as an isolated incident, she cut him off. "Counselor," she said firmly, "we have evidence of a pattern spanning 15 years. This court takes that very seriously." The afternoon brought more witnesses. Mrs. Rodriguez, the grandmother whose grandson had been harassed, shared her story. Teachers testified about Sullivan intimidating students of color. Business owners described watching him target minority customers. Sarah's father, Judge Miller, sat in the gallery, watching his daughter lead the prosecution. He had removed himself from the case due to personal connection, but his presence showed support for the bigger fight for justice. Near the end of the day, Sarah stood for her closing arguments. "Your Honor," she said, her voice strong with emotion, "my wedding day turned into something unexpected, but maybe it had to happen this way, because today, we're not just seeking justice for one incident. We're seeking justice for 15 years of victims who weren't heard. We're asking this court to show that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it." As the sun set outside the courthouse windows, Judge Henderson prepared to make her decision. The crowded courtroom held its breath, waiting to see if justice would finally be served. The police department's main conference room felt tense on Monday morning. Police Chief Martinez sat at the head of the table, surrounded by Internal Affairs investigators and city officials. On the wall, a large screen showed Sullivan's personnel file, now thick with newly discovered complaints. "This goes deeper than just one officer," Chief Martinez announced, his face grim. "The wedding incident exposed years of cover-ups. Now, we need to clean house." He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, the stress showing in his eyes. Detective Maria Rodriguez presented her findings to the room. "We've discovered that Captain William Brooks has been hiding complaints against Sullivan for years," she explained, putting documents on the table. "And he's not the only one. 3 desk sergeants helped bury evidence." Officer Janet Chen stood by the screen, clicking through photos of altered reports. They changed dates, lost paperwork, and intimidated victims into dropping complaints, she said. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice stayed strong. "I watched it happen, and I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner." Across town, Sarah sat in a meeting with the mayor and city council. "The police department needs complete reorganization," she argued, spreading evidence across the conference table. "We found racist text messages between Sullivan and 4 other officers. This isn't just about one bad cop anymore." The investigation had revealed a hidden network within the department. Officers who tried to report misconduct found their careers stalled. Those who helped cover up violations got promoted. The system had protected itself for years. Thomas, now back at work in the emergency room, helped expose more problems. "We found cases where Sullivan's victims needed medical treatment," he reported to the hospital board. The previous hospital administration helped hide these incidents. They were afraid of police retaliation. Captain Brooks was called into Chief Martinez's office that afternoon. His polished nameplate still hung on his door, but not for much longer. "Turn in your badge," the chief ordered. "We have proof you buried 37 racial complaints over 5 years." The department's computer experts discovered deleted emails showing how deep the corruption went. Messages between Sullivan and higher-ups revealed jokes about targeting minorities, warnings about incoming complaints, and plans to discredit witnesses. Sarah's office became the center for reform planning. "Look at these statistics," she told Michael, pointing to her computer screen. Every officer who reported misconduct in the last 10 years was either transferred, demoted, or forced to quit. The system punished good cops and rewarded bad ones. The police union tried to fight back, but the evidence was too strong. Their usual tactics of defending officers at any cost backfired as more proof of systematic racism emerged. Even union members started speaking out against the corruption. Linda rushed into Sarah's office with breaking news. "They just suspended 5 more officers," she announced. "And Captain Brooks is under criminal investigation. They found offshore accounts where he kept bribe money." The department's training center underwent immediate changes. New instructors replaced those who had taught discriminatory practices. Security cameras were installed in all areas, and body camera rules became stricter. No more conveniently broken equipment during incidents. Officer Chen led a new task force examining every complaint filed in the past decade. "We're reopening cases that were wrongly dismissed," she explained to a room of investigators. Some victims didn't even know their complaints had been buried. At the hospital, Thomas worked with administrators to create new protocols. "No more ignoring police misconduct in the ER," he insisted. "We're doctors first. Our duty is to patients, not to covering up abuse." The mayor called a press conference to announce major changes. "Thanks to Sarah Miller Johnson and what happened at her wedding, we've exposed years of institutional racism," he admitted. "Now we're rebuilding our police department from the ground up." Sarah watched the press conference from her office, still surrounded by evidence boxes. "It's like pulling a loose thread," she told Michael. "Sullivan was just the beginning. Now the whole corrupt system is unraveling." Chief Martinez made one final announcement that day. "We're creating a new oversight division," he said. "And we're asking Sarah Miller Johnson to lead it. Sometimes it takes a bride in a wedding dress to show us the truth we've been ignoring." The reckoning had begun. What started with one racist cop at a wedding had exposed an entire system of corruption. Now, finally, real change was possible. The courthouse was packed on the final day of Officer Sullivan's trial, 3 months after the wedding incident. Sarah sat in the front row, holding Michael's hand tightly. Thomas, his arm fully healed now, sat on her other side. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Henderson entered, carrying the final verdict papers. The room fell silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, waiting for justice. "In the case of the state versus James Sullivan," Judge Henderson began, her voice clear and strong, "on the charges of assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of power, this court finds the defendant guilty on all counts." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Sullivan's face turned red with anger as officers approached to take him into custody. His police badge and gun were long gone, and now his freedom would be too. Judge Henderson's voice continued. "This court sentences the defendant to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of early release." Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Sarah and Thomas. "This isn't just my victory," Sarah told the cameras. "This is for every person Sullivan hurt over his 15 years of abuse. This is for everyone who filed complaints that were ignored. This is for every voice that wasn't heard until now." The changes in the police department continued to spread. Captain Brooks and 4 other senior officers faced criminal charges for covering up complaints. The police academy introduced new training programs focusing on community relations and anti-racism. Sarah's law firm had transformed into something bigger. With the help of community donations, she opened the Wedding Day Justice Center, a place where victims of police misconduct could get free legal help. The waiting room walls displayed framed photos from her wedding day, not the happy celebration she planned, but the moment she stood up against injustice. Thomas returned to his emergency room work with a new mission. He started a program helping doctors document and report cases of police abuse. Every medical professional must be part of the solution, he told his staff. No more looking the other way. Michael finally had news about their postponed honeymoon. Hawaii can wait, he announced at a community meeting. We're using the honeymoon fund to create scholarships for young people who want to become civil rights lawyers. Officer Janet Chen was promoted to lead the department's new Internal Affairs Division. We're creating a system where good officers can report problems without fear, she explained. No more secret cover-ups, no more buried complaints. The police union underwent major reforms. New leadership promised transparency and accountability. We'll protect good officers, the new union president declared, but we won't defend racism or abuse of power anymore. Sarah's wedding dress, still carrying memories of that dramatic day, found a new home. The City Museum created an exhibit about police reform, displaying the dress as a symbol of standing up against injustice. Next to it, visitors could read hundreds of stories from Sullivan's victims who finally got justice. 1 year after the wedding incident, Sarah and Thomas stood together at a community celebration. The changes they started had spread to other cities. Police departments across the country were adopting their new oversight methods. You know, Thomas said, smiling at his cousin, your wedding day didn't go as planned, but look what it created. He gestured to the crowd of people, community leaders, reformed police officers, and citizens all working together for change. Linda rushed up with exciting news. Sarah, the governor just signed the new Police Accountability Act. They're calling it the Wedding Day Law because it all started at your wedding. The law required body cameras, civilian oversight boards, and strict punishment for officers who abused their power. It protected whistleblowers who reported misconduct and created a public database of police complaints. That evening, Sarah and Michael finally had their wedding reception. 1 year late but perfect in its own way. The same hotel hosted it, but this time, the guests included reformed police officers, community leaders, and families whose lives had changed because of their fight for justice. As Sarah looked around the ballroom, she saw something beautiful. Former victims now stood as advocates. Police officers chatted with community members they once feared. Real change had happened. Sometimes love and justice arrive in unexpected ways, Sarah told the crowd during her speech. My wedding day turned into something bigger than a celebration of love between two people. It became a movement for justice, equality, and change. And that might be the most beautiful wedding gift of all.